You ever wondered how your body keeps everything in balance? Let us enter the endocrine system, your body's internal manager. This report delves into the world of hormones and glands, uncovering the vital role they play in keeping you healthy and functioning at your best. So, the endocrine system is a major regulatory system that influences metabolism, growth, reproduction, and many other functions. It consists of endocrine glands, including the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid gland, adrenal gland, gonads, and other tissues that secretes hormones. So the endocrine glands and cells secrete small amount of chemical messengers called hormones into the extracellular fluid. These hormones are then diffused in the blood and are delivered to various targets, tissues, or effectors. When these hormones reach their specific sites, they stimulate a specific response. Thus, the term endocrine is derived from the word endo, meaning within, and crino, to secrete. So here is an overview of the parts of the endocrine system. Its major parts are the pineal gland, the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroids, thymus, adrenals, pancreas, ovaries, and testes. So the endocrine system is one of the important regulatory systems together with the nervous system. This regulation system occurs to maintain homeostasis in the body. So here are the following main regulatory functions of the endocrine system. First is the regulation of metabolism. It controls the rate of nutrient utilization and energy reproduction. Second is control of food intake and functions. This regulates the level of satiation and the breakdown of food into individual nutrients. Number three is modulation of tissue development, as it influences the development of tissues such as those of nervous system. Fourth is the regulation of ion levels. It helps monitor blood pH as well as the Na+, K+, and Ca2+ concentration in the blood. Number five is control of water balance. It regulates water balance by controlling the solute concentration of the blood as well as controlling membrane permeability. Number six is the regulation of cardiovascular functions. It helps regulate the heart rate and blood pressure and prepare the body for physical activity. Number seven is it control blood glucose and other nutrients. This regulates the level of glucose and other nutrients in the blood. Number eight is it control of reproductive functions. It controls the development and functions of the reproductive systems in males and females. Number nine, stimulation of uterine contractions and milk release. This regulates uterine contractions during delivery and stimulates milk release from the breast in lactating females. And lastly, modulation of immune system function. This helps control the production of immune system. Now let us move forward to the hormones, which will be discussed by Christian.
Hormones. Glands. First, let's start up with the glands. Gland is an organ that makes one or more substances, such as hormones, digestive juices, sweat, or tears. These glands release hormones directly into your bloodstream. So, what is a hormone? Hormones are chemicals that coordinate different functions in your body by carrying messages through your blood to various organs, skin, muscles, and other tissues. These signals tell your body what to do and when to do it. Hormones can be excreted through the kidneys and liver. Hormones are chemical messengers that coordinate different functions in your body. Several glands, organs, and tissues make and release hormones, many of which make up your endocrine system. Hormones control many different bodily processes, including metabolism, homeostasis, growth and development, sexual function, reproduction, sleep-wake cycle, and as well as mood. Hormones are chemical substances that act on specific tissues secreted by cells diffused into the blood. It can be dissolved in plasma or bind to plasma proteins. Hormones can be chemically categorized as lipid and protein groups. First, the lipid groups. Most lipid hormones are derived from cholesterol. The primary class of lipid hormones in humans is the steroid hormone. And protein group, also known as the peptide hormones, are typically generated as prohormones that are secreted into the circulatory system following specific stimuli and exert their effect in the endocrine manner. Secretion of most hormones are being controlled by negative feedback mechanisms. In negative feedback system, a stimulus causes a release of substance effect that inhibit further release. In this state, the concentration of hormones in blood is maintained within a narrow range. So, what are the mechanisms that may affect the secretion of hormones? First is stress. Too much stress can also cause an irregular menstrual cycle and infertility in women, as well as decrease in libido in both men and women. Because stress also triggers mood swings and irritability, a hormone imbalance can lead to personal problems. Next is infection. Bacteria may infect endocrine glands either by direct invasion or local or homogeneous spread or hematogenous spread, Sportive bacterial infections can involve the pituitary, thyroid, adrenals, and gonads. Last is the changes in the balance of fluid and minerals in the blood. A humoral stimulus refers to the control of hormone release in response to the change of extracellular fluids such as blood or the ion concentration in the blood. For example, a rise in the blood glucose levels triggers the pancreatic release of insulin. So, the tryptophan releasing hormone or TRH is released from the neurons in the hypothalamus and travels in the blood to the anterior pituitary gland. Then the TRH stimulates the release of thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Then it travels in the blood to the thyroid gland. Next, the TSH stimulates the secretion of thyroid hormones from the thyroid gland into the blood. Thyroid hormones act on tissues to produce responses. And then thyroid hormones also have a negative feedback effect on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to inhibit both TRH secretion and the TSH secretion. The negative feedback helps keep blood thyroid hormone levels within a narrow range. Water-soluble hormones. It is amines and proteins that do not possibly diffuse through the cell membrane. Because many water-soluble hormones are quite large, they cannot readily diffuse through the walls of all capillaries. Therefore, they tend to diffuse from the blood into the tissue spaces more slowly. Water-soluble hormones can dissolve in blood. Many most of them dissolve directly into the blood and are delivered to the target tissues. Water-soluble hormones bind to the respective receptors expressed in the extracellular surface of the target cell membrane. Water-soluble hormones are polar molecules. They include protein hormones, peptide hormones, and most amino acid derivative hormones. Water-soluble hormones have relatively short half-lives because they are rapidly degraded by enzymes called proteases within the bloodstream. Hormones with half-short lives normally have concentrations that change rapidly within the blood and tend to regulate activities that have rapid onset or short duration. Lipid-soluble hormones.
Good.
Lipid-soluble hormones are non-polar and include hormones, thyroid hormones, and fatty acid derivative hormones. Lipid-soluble hormones easily diffuse through the cell membrane. Because their small size and low solubility in aqueous fluids, lipid-soluble hormones travel in the bloodstream attached to binding proteins that transport the hormones. Steroid hormones are the most common circulating lipid-soluble hormones. Steroid hormones include testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, aldosterone, and cortisol. The breakdown products are then excreted in the urine or the bile. So here 10 point illustrate that when the blood level of particular chemical changes, like the calcium, the hormone PTH is released in response to the chemical's concentration. As another example, if a runner has just finished a long race during hot weather, he may not produce urine for up to 12 hours after the race because the elevated concentration of blood stimulates the release of water conservation hormone called antidiuretic hormone. Figure 10.3 illustrates the neural control of hormone secretion from cells of an endocrine gland. For example, in response to stimuli such as stress or exercise, the sympathetic division of autonomic nervous system stimulates the adrenal gland to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, which help the body respond to the stimulus. Responses include elevated heart rate and increased blood flow through the exercising muscles. When the stimulus is no longer present, the neural stimulation declines and the secretion of epinephrine decreases. Uh, this type of regulation is hormonal stimuli. It occurs when a hormone is secreted that in turn stimulates the secretion of other hormones. The figure 10.4, for example, hormones from hypothalamus and anterior pituitary regulate the secretion of thyroid hormones in thyroid gland. So there are three types of inhibition of hormones releases. First, the inhibition of hormone released by humoral, neural, and then the hormonal. So in the negative feedback, most hormones are regulated by a negative feedback mechanism, whereby the hormone secretion is inhibited by the hormone itself once blood levels have reached a certain point, and there is adequate hormone to activate the target cell. It is a self-limiting system. For example, thyroid hormones inhibit the secretion for the release of hormone from the hypothalamus and tropic hormone from the anterior pituitary. Positive feedback. Some hormones, when stimulated by a tropic hormone, promote the synthesis and secretion of the tropic hormone, in addition to stimulating their target cell. In addition, or in turn, this stimulates further secretion of the original hormone. Thus, it is a self-propagating system. For example, prolonged estrogen stimulation promotes a release of anterior pituitary hormone responsible for stimulating ovulation. Receptors. A target cell protein where hormones excrete or exert their actions by binding to it. A hormone can stimulate only the cells that have receptor for that hormone. So hormones receptor are protein that bind hormones. Basically, once bound, the hormone or the receptor complex initiates a cascade effect, resulting in some modification of physiological behavior. Receptor site is the portion of each receptor molecule where a hormone binds. The shape and chemical characteristics of each receptor sites allow only a specific type of hormone bind to it. Specificity is the tendency of each type of hormone to bind to one type of receptor and not to others. It is defined by each receptor only binding to one hormone, each hormone having specific classes of receptors. First is the membrane-bound receptor. It is a membrane proteins that extend across the cell membrane with their hormone binding sites exposed to the cell membrane's outer surface. It spans the plasma membrane, bind the water-soluble or large molecule weight hormones. Many membrane-bound receptors produces responses through the action of G proteins, and these G proteins is consist of three subunits, the alpha, beta, and the gamma. Inactive site is the GDP or the guanosine diphosphate is bound to a subunit, and the active state is the GTP or the guanosine triphosphate bound to a subunit. So here is the membrane bond receptor activating. Uh, First is after a water-soluble hormone binds to its receptor, the G protein is activated. Then the activated alpha subunit with GTP bound to it binds to the enzyme and adenylate cyclase enzyme so that it converts ATP to CAMP. The CAMP can activate proteins kinase enzymes which phosphorylate specific enzymes activating them. The chemical reactions catalyzed by the activated enzymes produce the cell response. Then the phosphodiesterase enzyme inactivates CAMP and converting CAMP to AMP. Intracellular receptors. It is also known as the nuclear proteins, most often found in the cell nucleus, but can also be located in the cytoplasm and move to the nucleus when activated. Bind small or lipophilic molecules such as steroid hormones, which can cross the cell membrane. The receptor hormones complex diffuses into the nucleus where it activates genes. Here, mRNA is produced. mRNA initiates the production of certain protein enzymes that produce the response of the target cell to the hormone. Intracellular receptor mechanisms are slow acting because time is required to produce the mRNA and the protein. So, nuclear receptor model, as you can see, lipid soluble hormones diffuse through the plasma membrane. Then the lipid soluble hormones either bind to the cytoplasmic receptors and then travel to the nucleus and bind to the nuclear receptors. Then the hormone receptor complex bind to the hormone response element on the DNA. Then the binding of the hormone receptor complex to the DNA stimulates the synthesis of the messenger mRNA. Uh, and the newly synthesized proteins produce a cell's response to the lipid soluble hormones, for example, the secretion of a new protein. The cascade effect is an unforeseen chain of events that occurs when an event in a system has a negative impact on other related systems. Basically, that it is the change that the first thing caused in the second thing. For an example of a cascade effect caused by a loss of a top predator is apparent in tropical forests. When hunters cause local extinctions of top predators, the predator's prey population number increase, causing an overexploitation of a food resource and a cascade effect of species loss. Produced by intracellular mediator mechanisms since they act rapidly because they work on already existing enzymes. It is a sequence of successive activation reactions involving enzymes or hormones characterized by a series of amplification of an initial stimulus. So here's an example of the endocrine cascade effect that it starts in the blood sugar imbalances, then goes to the adrenals, pituitary, thyroid, and then the sex hormones. Also an example of the cascade effect as what I have said earlier. First gland is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland called as the master gland because its hormones control over other parts of the endocrine system, such as thyroid, adrenal, ovaries, and testes. It is also called as hypophysis. The pituitary gland is located in the brain between the hypothalamus and pineal gland, just behind the bridge of the nose. It is about the size of a pea. Pituitary gland makes, stores, and releases hormones. Hypothalamus, an important ANS or autonomic nervous system, and endocrine control center of the brain. It acts as your body's smart control coordinating center. Its main function is to keep your body in stable state called homeostasis. Then the hypothalamus controls the PG or the pituitary gland by hormonal control and direct innervations. The pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus through a stalk of blood vessels and nerves of the pituitary stalk. So here are some examples of hormones. First is the growth hormone releasing hormone, then the growth hormone inhibiting hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, prolactin, and the last is the prolactin releasing hormone. Infundibulum is a stalk that connects the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. It is the connection between the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, especially the posterior pituitary gland. It allows hypothalamic hormones to be transported to the anterior pituitary without first entering the systemic circulation. Anterior pituitary is made up of epithelial cells derived from embryonic organoid. One of the two lobes of the pituitary gland located at the cell tertiary of controlled by the hypothalamus. It is responsible for creating and releasing over 6 different hormones that affect many different bodily processes. Next is the posterior pituitary, an extension of the brain composed of nerve cells. It is also known as the neurohypophysis, located at the back lobe of your pituitary gland. The hormones produced in this posterior pituitary gland include vasopressin and oxytocin. Hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system connects the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. It provides the mechanism for hypothalamic neuroendocrine regulation of pituitary function and the release of various pituitary hormones into the systemic circulation to be homeostasis. Next is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. It connects the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. Its function is carried to hypothalamic nerve hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, to the neurohypophysis where they are stored and released upon the body's needs. So here's the picture of the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. So stimuli within the nervous system regulates the secretion of releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones from neurons of the hypothalamus. Then releasing hormones, inhibiting hormones pass through the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system to the anterior pituitary. Then releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones leave capillaries and stimulate or inhibit the release of hormones from anterior pituitary. In response to releasing hormones, anterior pituitary hormones travels in the blood to their target tissues, which in some cases are other endocrine glands. Thalamus and the posterior pituitary. The stimuli within the nervous system cause hypothalamic neurons to either increase or decrease their action potential. Action potentials are conducted by axons of the hypothalamic neurons through the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract to the posterior pituitary. The axon endings and neuron stores neurohormones in the posterior pituitary. In the posterior pituitary gland, action potential cause the release of neurohormones from axon terminals into the circulatory system. The neurohormones pass through the circulatory system and influence the activity of further target tissues. So here are the hormones secreted by the pituitary gland: the growth hormone, thyroid-stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, melanocyte-stimulating hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, antidiuretic hormone or the vasopressin, oxytocin, and prolactin. Growth hormone target tissues are the liver, muscle, bone, and adipose tissue, or mostly most tissues. It increases the gene expression, breakdown of lipids, and release of fatty acid from the cells, increase blood glucose level. So growth hormone is produced by our brain's pituitary gland and governs our height, bone length, and muscle growth. So pituitary dwarf is the deficiency in the growth hormone, although normally proportioned. Gigantism is excess growth hormone, exaggerated bone growth occurs. Acromegaly, abnormally large facial features, hands or feet. Insulin-like growth factors or the IGFs are functions as the major mediator for growth hormone, stimulating somatic growth as well as mediator of growth hormone independent anabolic responses in many cells and tissues. Thyroid stimulating hormone target tissues are the basolateral aspect of the thyroid follicular cell or the thyroid gland. It promotes synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormone. It responds increases thyroid hormone secretion of the thyroxine or the thiodeoxyretin, a glycoprotein hormone produced by an anterior pituitary. Adrenocorticotropic hormone target tissues are the adrenal cortex. It increases secretion of glucocorticoid hormones, increases skin pigmentation of high concentration. Melanocyte stimulating hormone target tissues are the melanocyte in skin. It increases melanin production in melanocytes to make skin darker in color. Follicle stimulating hormone target tissues are the ovary and testes, follicles in ovary in females, seminiferous tubules in males. It promotes follicle maturation and estrogen secretion on ovary, promotes sperm cell production in testes. Luteinizing hormone target tissues are the testes in males and ovaries in females. It promotes ovulation and progesterone production on ovary. The interstitial cell stimulating hormone, or the ICSH, promotes testosterone synthesis and support for sperm cell production in testes. It is a hormone produced by the anterior lobe of pituitary gland that in the male stimulates the interstitial cells of the testes to produce testosterone. Prolactin, target tissue is the mammary gland, stimulates milk production and prolongs progesterone secretion following ovulation and during pregnancy in women. It also increases sensitivity in LH or the luteinizing hormone in males. Antidiuretic hormone or the vasopressin target tissues are kidneys and blood arteries. Conserves water, constricts blood vessels, syndrome of inappropriate PTH, diabetes, oxytocin. It is a natural hormone that stimulates uterine contractions in childbirth and lactation after childbirth. It also affects aspects of human behavior in the male and female reproductive system. Target tissues are the myoepithelial cells of the breast, smooth muscle cells of the uterus. Response is increased uterine contractions. Another target tissue is the mammary gland. Response is increased milk letdown from mammary glands. Another fact about oxytocin is that oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin are often referred as our happy hormones. When you're attracted to another person, your brain releases dopamine, your serotonin level increase, and oxytocin is produced. This causes you feel a surge of positive emotion.
So for our next endocrine gland, we have the parathyroid gland. For the hormone, parathyroid hormone or PTH, its target tissue is the bone and the kidney. Its response is it increases rate of bone breakdown by osteoclasts and it increases vitamin D synthesis, and it is also essential for maintenance of normal blood calcium levels. A parathyroid gland is a four tiny glands embedded in the posterior wall of the thyroid gland as pointed in the arrow. It also secretes a hormone called parathyroid hormone, which is essential for the regulation of blood calcium levels, and it regulates blood calcium levels, and parathyroid hormones is more important than calcitonin in regulating blood calcium hormones. In case in regulating blood calcium levels. In regulating calcium levels, in case of decreasing, it stimulates an increase in PTH secretion. Increased PTH increases the rate of bone reabsorption, while increasing blood calcium levels causes a decrease in parathyroid hormone secretion. With this, increasing blood calcium levels stimulate calcitonin secretion, which causes blood calcium levels to decline. Hyperparathyroidism, it is abnormally high rate of parathyroid hormone secretion. The bones became soft, deformed, and easily fractured. It results to kidney stones. One cause is a tumor in a parathyroid gland. The elevated blood levels of PTH increase bone reabsorption, which elevates blood calcium levels. While hypoparathyroidism is abnormally low rate of PTH secretion, it can result from injury or surgical removal of thyroid and PTH glands. It also leads to reduction in the rate of bone reabsorption and formation of vitamin D. It causes frequent muscle cramps and tetanus. Hypothyroidism has low blood levels of PTH, which um, has a response of nerves and muscle become excitable and produces spontaneous action potentials that causes frequent muscle cramps and this tetanus.
Now, let us move forward to the thyroid gland, which is also a major part in the endocrine system. So the thyroid gland is composed of three hormones, the thyroid hormones and the calcitonin. So first is the thyroid hormones, which consists of thyroxine and triiodothyronine, and its target tissues are most cells of the body. Its response is the increases metabolic rate, essential for normal processes of growth and maturation. Third is the calcitonin. Its target tissue is are primarily bone, and its response is a decrease. It decreases rate of bone breakdown, prevents large increase in blood calcium levels following a meal. So the thyroid hormones regulate overall metabolism and growth in various cells, while calcitonin specifically targets bone tissue to reduce bone breakdown and helps prevent a rapid increase blood calcium levels after eating. So together, these hormones contribute to the maintenance of stable and functional internal environment within the body. Next, please. So the thyroid gland is one of the largest endocrine glands. The thyroid gland is located in the neck and it plays a crucial role in regulating various metabolic processes. It synthesizes and secretes three hormones. First is the thyronine, second is the thyroxine, and third is the calcitonin. It is made up of two lobes located at each side of the trachea, connected by a narrow band called the isthmus. This unique design allows for optimal functionality and coordination of hormone release. So it appears more red than the surrounding tissues because it is highly vascular. The rich blood supply is crucial for transporting hormones and nutrients, and also the glands is encapsulated in connective tissues, providing structural support and protection. Next, please. The thyroid gland requires iodine to synthesize thyroid hormones. So the thyroid gland actively takes up iodine from the bloodstream to incorporate it into the synthesis of thyroxine, which has four iodine atoms, and triiodothyronine, which has three iodine atoms. So without iodine, thyroid hormones are neither produced nor secreted. In the absence of sufficient iodine, the thyroid gland cannot synthesize thyroxine and triiodothyronine, leading to a deficiency of these critical hormones. So the epithelial cells of the follicles synthesizes the thyroid hormones, the T3 and T4, which are stored within the follicles. These cells plays a vital role in the production of thyroid hormones, which are then stored within the follicles until they are needed for release into the bloodstream. So each thyroid follicle is filled with the protein thyroglobin, to which thyroid hormones are attached. So the protein thyroglobin acts as a servo, holding and binding the synthesized thyroid hormones. When the body requires an increase in thyroid hormone levels, thyroglobin releases T3 and T4 into the bloodstream. Next, please. So, the thyroid hormones attach to nuclear receptors in their target cells and regulate the metabolic rate of the body. So once the T3 and T4 are bound, they modulate gene expression, playing a key role in the regulation of the body's metabolic rate. This means they control how fast cells convert nutrients into energy, affecting the overall metabolism. Between the follicles is a network of loose connective tissues that contain capillaries and scattered parafollicular cells, or C cells, which secrete the hormone calcitonin. The calcitonin is a hormone that plays a role in regulating calcium levels in the blood, particularly by decreasing bone breakdown. So the thyroid hormones secretion is regulated by hormones from both the hypothalamus and the pituitary. The release of thyroid hormones is tightly regulated by a feedback loop involving the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus releases thyrotropin-releasing hormone, so the TRH, which stimulates the pituitary gland to produce thyroid-stimulating hormones, or the TSH. TSH, in return, prompts the thyroid glands to release thyroid hormones. This intricate feedback system ensures that the body maintains appropriate levels of thyroid hormones. Next, please. So here's the process of the regulation of the thyroid hormones, the T3 and the T4 secretion. First is the hypothalamus secretes TSH releasing hormones, also known as TRH. Stress and hypothermia cause the TRH to be released from neurons within the hypothalamus. It passes through the hypothalamus hypophyseal portal system to the anterior pituitary. Second is the TRH travels to the anterior pituitary to stimulate the secretion of thyroid-stimulating hormones, or the TSH. Third is the TSH causes increased synthesis and release of T3 and T4 into the general circulation. The small fluctuations in blood TSH levels occur on a daily basis with a small increase at night. Increasing blood levels of TSH increase the synthesis and the release of thyroid hormones from the thyroglobin. Decreasing blood levels of TSH decreases the synthesis and release of thyroid hormones. Fourth is the T3 and T4 acts on target tissues to produce a response. Fifth, the T3 and T4 also have an inhibitory effect on the secretion of TRH from the hypothalamus and TSH from the anterior pituitary. So in summary, this sequence of events outlines a sophisticated feedback loop that ensures the precise regulation of thyroid hormone levels in response to various internal and external factors, contributing to the maintenance of overall physiological balance in the body. Next, please. So there are certain conditions here that are related to the thyroid gland. So for instance, is a goiter. It is the loss of a negative feedback that results in excess of TSH. So goiter is the enlargement of the thyroid gland. Then we have hypothyroidism, which is the lack of thyroid hormones. So in infants, hypothyroidism can result in cretinism. And cretinism is characterized by first is developmental delay, second is short stature, and third is abnormally formed skeletal structures. In adults, the lack of thyroid hormones results in a decreased metabolic rate, which can result in first low body temperature, second weight gain, third is reduced appetite, and fourth is lethargy. Next, please. Next is the calcitonin. So the calcitonin is secreted by the parafollicular cells of the thyroid gland. While the primary function of the thyroid follicular cells is to produce thyroid hormones, which are the T3 and the T4, the follicular cells specifically handle the synthesis and secretion of calcitonin. So it is secreted if the blood concentration of calcium becomes too high. The calcitonin serves as a regulator of blood calcium levels, so when the concentration of calcium ions in the bloodstream rises above the normal range, the parafollicular cells releases calcitonin in response. This hormone then acts to reduce blood calcium levels. So the calcitonin may prevent blood calcium levels from becoming overly elevated following a meal that contains a high concentration of calcium. So after a meal that is rich in calcium, the calcitonin may play a role in preventing significant spike in blood calcium levels. This preventive action contributes to the overall regulation of calcium homeostasis in response to dietary intake. Next is the calcitonin helps prevent elevated blood calcium levels, but a lack of calcitonin secretion does not result in a prolonged increase in this level. So a deficiency in calcitonin secretion does not lead to a sustained increase in blood calcium levels. Other regulatory mechanisms, such as the action of parathyroid hormones, compensate for the absence of calcitonin, ensuring that the blood calcium levels are maintained within the appropriate range. Next, please. So here is the illustration of the regulation of the calcium ion blood levels. So first, there are two cases. First is when the blood calcium levels increases, the parafollicular cells increases calcitonin secretion, and the parathyroid gland decreases the PTH secretion. Then it results into a decreased bone reabsorption and decreased uptake of calcium from the intestine and the kidney results. Um, then the homeostasis is restored because the blood calcium levels decreases. The second case is when the blood calcium level decreases. So the parafollicular cells decreases the calcitonin secretion and the parathyroid gland increases the PTH secretion. This results in increased bone reabsorption and increased uptake of calcium from the intestine and kidney result. Then it restored the homeostasis in the body because the blood calcium levels increases.
So next is the adrenal medulla. Hormones are mostly epinephrine and some are norepinephrine. The target tissues are heart, blood vessels, liver, and adipocytes. Its response is to increase cardiac output, increases blood flow to skeletal muscles and heart, increases release of glucose and fatty acids into blood, and in general prepares body for physical activity. Activation of the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. The sympathetic nervous system is most active when a person is excited or physically active. These hormones bind to membrane-bound receptors in their target tissues. The principal hormone from the adrenal medulla is epinephrine or adrenaline. Small amounts of norepinephrine are also released. Stress and low blood glucose levels can also cause increased sympathetic stimulation of the adrenal medulla. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are called the fight or flight hormones. They prepare the body for intense physical activity. So this is the process of the regulation of adrenal medullary secretions. Secretion of adrenal medulla hormones can occur under various conditions that activate the sympathetic nervous system. For example, stress, low blood glucose, or excitement cause secretion of these hormones. An increased frequency of action potentials conducted through the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla to secrete epinephrine and some norepinephrine into the circulatory system. These hormones bind to membrane-bound receptors in their target tissues where they prepare the body for intense physical activity. Next, please. The major effects of the hormones released from the adrenal medulla are first, release of stored energy sources to support increased physical activity. These energy sources are glucose and fatty acids entering the blood. The glucose is primarily delivered from breakdown of liver glycogen. The fatty acids are derived from the breakdown of adipose tissue. Second is increased heart rate, which raises blood pressure. Third, increased smooth muscle contraction in internal organ and skin blood vessels. Fourth is increased blood flow to skeletal muscle. The vasoconstriction in the internal organs and skin blood vessels reduces blood flow to those tissues. The smooth muscle in skeletal muscle blood vessels does not contract. That in combination with decreased blood flow elsewhere explains the increased blood flow to the skeletal muscle. Fifth is the increase in metabolic rate of several tissues, especially skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and nervous tissue. Responses to hormones of the adrenal medulla reinforce the effect of sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Thus, adrenal medulla and the sympathetic division function together to prepare the body for physical activity and to produce the fight or flight response and many other responses to stress. Next is the adrenal cortex. The hormones are mineralocorticoids or also called aldosterone. The target tissue are kidneys, to lesser degree intestine and sweat glands. Response is increased rate of sodium transport into body, increased rate of potassium excretion, and secondarily favor water retention. Next is the hormone is the glucocorticoids, or also called cortisol. Target tissue are most tissues, for example, liver, fat, skeletal muscle, and immune tissues. Its response is to increase lipid and protein breakdown, increase glucose synthesis and from amino acids, and increase blood nutrient levels, and inhibit inflammation and immune response. The next hormone is adrenal androgens. Its target tissues are most tissues. Its response is insignificant in males, increased female sexual drive, and growth of pubic and axillary hair. Adrenal cortex secretes three classes of steroid hormones. First is mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and androgens. The molecules of three classes of steroid hormones enter their target cells and bind to nuclear receptor molecules. However, the hormones and the receptors of each class have unique structural and functional characteristics. Aldosterone is the major hormone of this class. It regulates water balance, increases the rate of Na transport into body, and increases the rate of excretion. Aldosterone is produced in the greatest amounts, although other closely related mineralocorticoids and also secreted. Aldosterone is secreted under low blood pressure conditions. It returns blood pressure to its normal range through modulation of kidney function. Renin is a protein molecule that acts as an enzyme. Renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system helps the body to address decreasing blood volume. Next, please. Next is the cortisol, or also called glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids help to provide energy for cells by stimulating the increased use of lipids and proteins. It is the middle layer of the adrenal cortex that secretes the glucocorticoid hormones, primarily cortisol. The response are classified as metabolic, developmental, or anti-inflammatory. Glucocorticoids cause lipid breakdown, reduce glucose and amino acid uptake in skeletal system, stimulate synthesis of new glucose from precursor molecules, such as amino acids, and increase protein degr- degradation. Glucocorticoids also increase blood glucose levels and glycogen deposits in cells. The glucose and glycogen are a reservoir of molecules that can be metabolized rapidly. Cortisone is an artificial cortisol or an anti-inflammatory effect. Next, lastly is androgen. For male sex hormone, it stimulates the development of male characteristics and increases female sex drive for female hormones. Addison's disease is a hyposecretion of adrenal cortex hormones. Cushing disease is a tumor in middle cortex of hyperaldosteronism, hyperactivity of outer cortex, hirsutism, or masculinization of inner cortex. The third class of hormones secreted by the inner layer of adrenal cortex is composed of the adrenal androgens, which stimulates the development of male secondary sex characteristics. Small amounts of androgens are secreted from the adrenal cortex in both males and females. In adult males, most androgens are secreted by the testes. In adult females, the adrenal androgens are influenced by the female sex drive. If the secretion of reproductive hormones from the adrenal cortex is abnormally high, exaggerated male characteristics develop in both male and females. This condition is most apparent in females and in males before puberty, when the effects are not masked by the secretion of androgens by the testes. Next is the process of regulation of cortisol secretion from the adrenal cortex. Corticotropin releasing hormone is released from the hypothalamic neurons in response to stress or low blood glucose and passes by way of the hypothalamo-facial portal system to anterior pituitary. In the anterior pituitary, CRH binds to and stimulates cells that secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone. The middle layer of the adrenal cortex is very sensitive to ACTH binds its membrane-bound receptors. The adrenal cortex increases cortisol secretion. Cortisol acts on target tissues, resulting in increased breakdown of lipids and proteins, higher glucose levels, and increased inflammatory effects. Both ACTH and cortisol act via negative feedback to inhibit CRH secretion by the hypothalamus.
Next is the pancreas. So in the pancreas, we have two hormones, which are the insulin and the glucagon. So in the insulin, its target tissues are the liver, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue. Its response is the increased uptake and use of glucose and amino acids. For the glucagon, its target tissues are primarily liver. Its response is it increases breakdown of glycogen and release of glucose into the circulatory system. So, the insulin and the glucagon, which are produced by the pancreas, work in tandem to regulate blood glucose levels. So, insulin promotes the uptake and utilization of glucose and amino acids, while the glucagon increases the breakdown of glycogen and release of glucose into the circulatory system, ensuring a dynamic balance in response to the body's energy needs. Next, please. So the endocrine part of the pancreatic islets, or the islets of Langerhans, dispersed throughout the exocrine portion of the pancreas. The islets um, consists of three types. First is the alpha cells, which secretes the hormone glucagon, which plays a key role in raising blood glucose level by stimulating the breakdown of glycogen in the liver and the release of glucose into the bloodstream. Second are the beta cells, which secretes the hormone insulin, which is crucial for lowering blood glucose levels by promoting the uptake of glucose by cells, especially in the liver, muscle, and adipose tissues. Third is the delta cells, which secretes the hormones somatostatin, which has inhibitory effects on both insulin and glucagon. Somatostatin helps regulate the release of these hormones and contributes to the overall balance of blood glucose levels. Next, please. It is very important to maintain the blood glucose levels within a normal range. So, if the blood glucose is below normal, it results to the nervous system malfunction. Other tissues rapidly breaks down lipids and proteins. Then it also results to the breakdown of lipids, which can cause the release of enough fatty acids and ketones to acidosis. And it also, the amino acids of proteins are broken down and used by the liver to synthesize glucose. Next, please. So first is the insulin. The insulin is secreted or stimulated by the beta cells when blood glucose levels are elevated. This is crucial response to facilitate the uptake of glucose by cells, especially in tissues such as the liver, muscles, and adipose tissues. So the insulin is secreted and stimulated by an increased parasympathetic stimulation associated with the digestion of the meal. The parasympathetic nervous system, often referred to as the rest and digest system, becomes more active during the digestive process. Increased parasympathetic stimulation during meals signals the beta cells to release insulin. This ensures that the body is prepared to efficiently utilize the incoming nutrients, especially glucose, from the digested meal. So, the insulin is also secreted or stimulated by an increased blood levels of a certain amino acid. So, in addition to glucose, insulin secretion is also influenced by elevated levels of specific amino acids in the bloodstream. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and insulin's response to increased amino acids supports the uptake of these essential components for protein synthesis. So there are also two signals that inhibits insulin secretion. First is the low blood glucose levels. So when blood glucose levels drop below a certain threshold, the secretion of insulin is inhibited. This is a protective mechanism to prevent excessive insulin release when there is insufficient glucose available for cellular energy needs. So the second one is the stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, also known as the fight or flight system, can inhibit insulin secretion. This occurs during times of stress or when the body needs to mobilize energy resources for immediate use, diverting focus from storing nutrients to providing energy for a rapid response. So this decrease and increase of secretion of insulin under various factors ensures a balance and adaptive responses to the body's metabolic needs. Next, please. So here is the condition affecting the glucose levels, which is on diabetes. So the diabetes mellitus is the body's inability to regulate blood glucose levels within the normal range. There are two types of diabetes mellitus. First is the type 1 diabetes, where when there are too little insulin is secreted from the pancreas. Second is the type 2 diabetes, which occurs by either too few insulin receptors on target cells or defective receptors on target cells. The defective receptors do not respond normally to insulin. Next, please. The second hormone is the glucagon. So it is released from the alpha cells when blood glucose levels are low. So glucagon is a hormone produced by the alpha cells, which acts as a response to low blood glucose levels, serving as a counter-regulatory hormone to insulin. When blood glucose is low, glucagon is released to stimulate the processes that raise blood glucose. So the glucagon binds to membrane-bound receptors primarily in liver, causing the glycogen stored in the liver to be converted to glucose, and this process is known as glycogenolysis. The glucose is then released into the blood to increase blood glucose levels. So the glucose produced through glycogenolysis in the liver is released into the bloodstream. This release of glucose elevates blood glucose levels, ensuring a steady supply of energy to cells throughout the body, particularly during periods of fasting or low blood glucose. So after a meal, when blood glucose levels are elevated, glucagon secretion is reduced. So in a well-regulated system, the release of glucagon is inversely correlated with the blood glucose levels. After a meal, when the blood glucose levels are elevated due to the digestion and absorption of nutrients, the secretion of glucagon is reduced. This reduction in glucagon helps prevent an unnecessary increase in blood glucose levels, allowing insulin to take the lead in facilitating nutrients uptake by the cells. Next, please. So, on the other hand, the somatostatin, it is released by the delta cells in response to the food intake. These delta cells respond to food intake, and the release of somatostatin is part of the complex regulatory mechanism associated with the digestive processes. Somatostatin inhibits the secretion of insulin and glucagon. One of the key functions of somatostatin is to inhibit the secretion of both insulin and glucagon. So these hormones produced by the beta and alpha cells of the pancreas, respectively. By suppressing the release of these hormones, somatostatin contributes to the regulation of blood glucose levels, preventing excessive fluctuation in response to food intake. Then it inhibits gastric tract activities. It slows down the digestive processes in the stomach and small intestine. This inhibition helps coordinate the overall digestive response, allowing for controlled nutrients absorptions and utilizations. Next, please. So, the regulation of blood glucose levels. So, insulin and glucagon together regulate blood glucose levels. When the blood glucose levels is increased, the insulin secretion increases and the glucagon secretion decreases. When the blood glucose level decreases, the rate of insulin secretion declines, the rate of glucagon secretion increases, and the epinephrine, cortisol, and growth hormones helps maintain blood levels of nutrients. Next slide, please. So here is the illustration of the regulation of blood glucose levels. So first is when the blood glucose level increases, the secretion of insulin happens in the pancreas, intestine, and the autonomic nervous system. So this results to the insulin stimulation of glucose uptake by most tissues and promotes glycogen and storage in the skeletal muscles and liver. The excess glucose is converted to adipose. So this production of the insulin restores the homeostasis because it results to the blood glucose level decreases. Second is when the blood glucose level decreases, the pancreas, intestine, and the autonomic nervous system stops producing insulin. This results to a decreased insulin um, so the decreased insulin results in decreased glucose uptake, increased glycogen breakdown by the liver and skeletal muscle, and increased glucose synthesis in the liver. This um, results to the restoration of the homeostasis because the blood glucose level um, increases. So that's all for the pancreas.
So for So for our reproductive organs, the testes of the male and the ovaries of the female secrete reproductive hormones in addition to producing sperm cells or oocytes, respectively. The hormones produced by these organs play important roles in the development of sexual characteristics, structural and functional differences between males and females, as well as the ability to reproduce, depend on the reproductive hormones. So for the testes, we have the hormone testosterone and its target tissue, which is the most tissues, and its response it aids in sperm cell production, maintenance of functional reproductive organs, secondary sex characteristics, and sexual behavior. Next, please. It also regulates the production of sperm cells by the testes and the development and maintenance of male reproductive organs and secondary sexual characteristics. It initiates maturation of male reproductive organs, causes appearance of secondary sexual characteristics and sex drive, and it is necessary for sperm production, and it maintains sex organs in their functional state. It also plays a key role in the development of male reproductive tissues and characteristics. In addition to its reproductive functions, testosterone also influences muscle mass, bone density, and overall energy levels in both men and women, although it's present in higher levels in males. Next, please. For our next reproductive organ, we have the ovaries. Its hormone is estrogens and progesterone. Its target tissue is also the most tissues. Also responds, aids in uterine and mammary gland development and function, external genitalia structure, secondary sex characteristics, sexual behavior, and menstrual cycle. Next, please. The two hormones, along with the anterior pituitary hormones, are luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, control the female reproductive cycle. It also prepares the mammary glands for lactation and maintain pregnancy. Estrogen and progesterone are responsible for the development of female reproductive organs and female secondary characteristics. It also is the maturation of the reproductive organs, appearance of secondary sexual characteristics, breast development, and cyclic changes in the uterine mucosa. And for estrogen, it is responsible for the development and maintenance of female reproductive tissues and secondary sexual characteristics and plays a role in bone health and the regulation of the menstrual cycle, while progesterone, produced mainly in the ovaries, helps prepare the uterus for a fertilized egg and supports early pregnancy. Together, estrogen and progesterone regulates the menstrual cycle and contribute to various aspects of female and reproductive health.
Next is the thymus. Its hormone is thymosin. The target tissue is the immune tissues, and its response is to promote immune system development and function. The thymus lies in the upper part of the thoracic cavity. It is important in the function of the immune system. The thymus secretes a hormone called thymosin, which aids T cells help protect the body against infection by foreign organisms. The thymus is most important in early life. If an infant is born without a thymus, the immune system does not develop normally, and the body is less capable of fighting infections. Next is the pineal gland. Its hormone is melatonin. Its target tissues, among others, are hypothalamus, and its response is inhibits secretion of gonadotropin releasing hormone, thereby inhibiting reproduction. The pineal gland is a small pine cone shaped structure located superior and posterior to the thalamus of the brain. The pineal gland produces a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin is thought to inhibit the reproduction of hypothalamic hormone, releasing hormone. It inhibits secretion of gonadotropin releasing hormone, thus inhibits reproduction, biological clock, day and night cycle.
That's all for our report about the endocrine system. So we hope that you've understood our report and have a great day.